I was really excited to make this video, and then a person outside my window with a machine doing something is making a noise. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's driving me insane, and I can't be any more specific than that. It's a noise being made by a thing. But we're gonna power through, because that's what this channel's all about. Machismo. Let's talk about the 13 and a bit books that I read this month, what were real good, except for the bit one. The video I put up before this one that you can go watch if you haven't already is me waxing poetic and philosophical about this incredible thing. This is Exhalation, a collection of science fiction short stories by American author Ted Chiang. There are 9 stories in here of varying lengths. The shortest one is 4 pages long, the longest one is 100 pages long, and incidentally, that 100-page story is the only one in here I didn't like. But these are overall remarkable tales. In that video I picked my 3 favorites and talked about how they actually changed my brain. They changed my relationship to the world around me, my understanding of morals and ethics. This did to me, and it has done to others what so many philosophy books try to do. And the best science fiction often can do that. These are such incredible tales that explore various elements of science fiction, the tropes and ideas that we've seen done so many times, but they are done uniquely differently here, exploring really big ideas, huge philosophical and political concepts, even down to something like existential dread and how that can be fueled, and what it can feel like in a certain situation. I love science fiction, and I particularly love the power of it, what it can do to us as readers or watchers. And this is something else. This is a step up, a cut above so much great sci-fi. I am in awe of this collection, and I can't wait to read his other one. The final book that I read this month is one I'm going to do a video on soon, and that is The Haar by David Sodergren. I have so much love for David Sodergren. He's a Scotland-based, self-published horror writer. Everything he writes, he self-publishes through Amazon. Most of his covers are designed by this one really awesome artist. And he's one of those amazing grassroots self-published authors who has built an enormous dedicated fan base of horror fans. And I'm one of them. David's a really cool, interesting guy, and The Haar was an absolute knockout. Amongst his fans, this is often touted as his best work, and I totally see why. This is a book full of grotesque body horror. In fact, page 75 of this book I read with my hand over my mouth and my eyes bulging in shock. The grotesqueness of the body horror on a few pages is absolutely wild. But this is also kind of a forlorn love story about an old woman whose husband died like 12 years ago, lost at sea. He was a fisherman. They lived in a small fishing village on the coast of Scotland. And the big villain of the story is an American billionaire who wants to raise the village and build an enormous golf course. Our protagonist is an 84-year-old woman, and she's the only person in the village actually willing to stand up to this billionaire. But she gets a little help from a sea monster. I'll talk about it more in an upcoming video, but David Sodergren is special. As you know, I love indie publishing, I love self-publishing, and I really respect what he does. As you may have seen if you pay close attention to my channel, I recently finally read Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This is one of the most popular British novels of the last few years. I avoided it when it first came out because I was in a bad headspace, pandemic, etc. But I read her follow-up, Penance, I absolutely loved it, and so I finally got around to reading this thing. I don't know what that was, but I got very excited. This is a really special novel. I did a long and relatively detailed review of it. I had a lot of things to say, but one thing I didn't say in that review is the fact that a lot of people compare this to Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho, a novel I've never read, but I've seen the film a few times. And I completely understand the comparison. I really do. They actually have a lot in common. They are both commentaries. I'm not sure I want to say satires, but let's go with commentaries on the social landscape of their time and place. And they also both have unreliable narrators who slowly descend into madness, delusion, insecurity, paranoia. They are actually really similar books, so I totally get the comparisons, but for some reason I wasn't struck by that comparison while I was reading it. And I think that speaks to the immersion that you feel while reading this book and being lost in the protagonist's mind. I was quite addicted to the way that she thinks and behaves and treats other people. She is a horribly unlikable protagonist. Her morals are grotesque and there's a lot to hate about her, and I am a huge fan of unlikable protagonists. Boy Parts gave me so much that I love out of good literary stories, and I'm so glad I finally read it. One of the brand new books that I reviewed this month I received a review copy for was Lost in the Garden by Adam S. Leslie. This was published by my friends over at Dead Ink Books, and this is a folk horror tale. But it's also a road trip story. It is set in a strange, surreal, post-apocalyptic kind of a landscape where dead people have risen up as corporeal ghosts. They are unpredictable and violent, and they look like the people that they were, but they don't behave like them at all. And our three protagonists are teenage girls who go on a road trip to a village you're not supposed to ever go to. But they're going there because one of them has a package to deliver. Another one, her boyfriend disappeared and said he was going to go to that village to just check it out, and so she's gone to investigate. And the third one has a crush on the one with the boyfriend, so she just tags along. And it's their story of going to this strange, forbidden English village. It's a funny novel. I didn't expect that, but these characters have a wonderful repartee. The way that they banter with each other is a lot of fun. They are likable people in a strange and surreal horror situation. It is a novel that satirizes and extremifies, which I don't think is a word, but that's what popped into my head, small village English rural life. The author, Adam Leslie, and I both grew up in very, very rural communities. I grew up in a nowhere village in the West Midlands, and I related to so much of the creepiness and the eeriness of this story. I never liked village life. I was like a super self-aware kid. When I was like 4 or 5 years old, I would look around at my family and the people in the village I grew up in and be like, this is weird, these people are a bit off, aren't they? Like, I knew, I could feel it. It all felt very wrong, very eerie. I never liked it. And this book spoke to me in such an enormous way. Another advanced copy that I reviewed this month was this, The New Seoul Park Jelly Massacre by Cho Yeon. This was translated from the Korean into English by Yewon Jong and published by my friends at Huntress Star. What a fantastically strange little thing this is. It's a novel, but kind of presented as a short story collection because it's all set in one place and time, but each chapter focuses on a different character caught up in that place and time, and it's about how they got there and who they are and how they see what's happening from their perspective. And what's happening is that a man is prowling around a theme park, offering candy to strangers. Those strangers take the candy, eat it, and melt into a puddle of jelly-like goo. But why? What is happening, and what does it all mean? Well, you can watch my video to find out more. Pausing here for a little bit of self-promotion. In case you don't know, I edit books. I have my own freelance editing service that I offer to anyone who is writing their own fiction. If you're putting together some short stories, a novella, a novel, whatever it is, you're planning to send it to an agent, you're planning to self-publish it or send it to an indie publisher, and your book is nearly ready to go, but you just need it edited to make it absolutely perfect, send it my way. I love my work as an editor. I'm really good at it. My clients all agree. Every single person I've worked with has walked away very satisfied by what I've done, so if you're a writer looking to get published, send me your manuscript and I will edit it for you. My rates are fantastic. Pairing nicely with The Haar by David Sodergren is this, The House That Horror Built by Christina Henry. Christina Henry is one of those very reliable American horror authors. There's like a small group of them at this point. Each of these authors is reliably interesting and doing really good work in the world of horror. You've got Paul Tremblay, Stephen Graham Jones, Eric LaRocca, Grady Hendrix, and Christina Henry. This is the second Christina Henry novel that I've read, and at the time of recording, it's her newest book. This book had quite a mid-response online. If you look on Goodreads, a lot of people say it's not as good as the one that came out before it, which I haven't read yet, but it does sound really good. But I really enjoyed this book. I thought what was interesting about it is that it saves so much for a completely bonkers finale. It has quite a rigid 3-act structure, but the third act begins kind of slow. Nothing happens, and you think surely there has to be a big, massive something. And yeah, there is. The second half of the third act goes really hard. And I enjoyed that. That's what horror should do. It should keep you on your toes, feel unpredictable, feel tense, and it delivered on that. The novel is about a 34-year-old woman, which incidentally is how old I am, and it kind of freaked me out that she has a teenage son. She had this kid when she was like 19, and so he's like 15 years old now, and it makes me kind of dizzy that I could have a kid that would be like 15 now, quite easily. A lot of people my age do. Wow. Time Time is wild. Anyway, she's a great protagonist, and I really liked her son as well. His name's Gabe, and he has real Wesley Crusher energy. That's who I kept thinking of. All the way through this book, I was picturing Gabe as Wesley Crusher. Her name is Harry, and she is desperate for a job. She lives in Chicago, and she's struggling right now. It's post-pandemic, and she takes a job as a cleaner at this big Gothic mansion at the edge of town. But the guy who owns the mansion happens to be a very reclusive and secretive horror movie director, and he directed a lot of the films that she grew up on, that she really, really loves, and that her son loves too. They bonded over his films, and now she's cleaning his house, but the house is full of secrets. He has a dark past, and the house will reveal that dark past. I thought this was great! The third and final book that I got a review copy for that I reviewed this month was the Noh Mask Murder. This is by the late great Akimitsu Takagi, a Japanese author of Honkaku mystery books, who was writing post-World War II, and a lot of his books are about the political and social landscape of Japan post-World War II, and this was translated by Jesse Kirkwood and published by Pushkin Press. His first book, which I reviewed like 18 months ago, was The Tattoo Murder, and it was twice the size of this thing. I really enjoyed that. It was a great locked room mystery. It did things very differently, and it's wild to think that that book is now like 80 years old, and it still felt pretty fresh, and the same is true for this. The Noh Mask Murder has Takagi as a character, kind of as a protagonist, but also not. He explains at the beginning that his best friend invited him to solve a crime, but he was rubbish at it, so the best friend took over, wrote a journal about how he solved the crime, and then the journal was given to Takagi to publish. All of it's made up, none of that really happened, but it's wild to place yourself as a character in your own mystery story and write yourself as someone who failed to do so while they sat useless at the sidelines and their best friend solved the case. A best friend whom I'm also assuming was fictional. It's a crazy thing to do, very self-deprecating, and I loved it. The framing device, honestly, was my favorite thing about this. Just a really, really fun book. Maybe my favorite video that I did this month was a rundown of why I love Franz Kafka so much. I picked this collection up recently. This was also published by Pushkin, and this is a new translation of a whole bunch of really great Franz Kafka stories. This was translated by Alexander Starrett, and he has an introduction in here talking about how he selected these stories, and the selection process was just, I wanted to translate and have published all in one collection the best Kafka stories. So if you've never read Franz Kafka, Starrett and I both agree that his stories are better than his novels. Mostly because he wrote 2 full-length novels, but neither of them were actually complete. The Trial is fine, I haven't read The Castle, but I am obsessed with Kafka's stories and the Kafkaesque, so I did a video all about it. I read this book while my partner was getting a tattoo, actually, and then I read The Metamorphosis, which is in this book behind me. And I'm not done. I'm gonna be using these books in like a week's time to make a video about how you can tell what makes a good translation, and I'm going to explain it. Even if you don't speak any other languages, how do you know what makes a good translation? Well, stick around and I'll show you. But please go check out that video on Kafka if you have any interest in what he was doing and what the Kafkaesque is, because I'm very proud of that one. Here's a little heartbreak. This is Song of the Huntress by Lucy Holland. It's her second novel, and just like the first one, it is set in the early English Middle Ages. Post-Roman Empire, Anglo-Saxon stuff, not an era I know much about, but I love reading fiction set within it because it allows me to learn more while also being very much entertained. Her first book was Sister Song, which is sitting behind me, and I loved that thing. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. It's about 3 English princesses whose father is a king, trying to stave off an invasion, and one of those sisters turns out to be a trans guy. I was like, this is great, this is awesome. Really, really fun English medieval fantasy. There's a decent dollop of magic in it, and I had a great time reading something that blurs the lines between historical fiction and fantasy. So I didn't even think about picking this up. I knew it was coming out. In fact, right at the start of this year, I made a big video listing all the books coming out this year that I was really excited about. One of those books, a Japanese novel called Butter, already broke my heart because I didn't like it and it was my most anticipated book of the whole year. And then along came this. I picked it up immediately, I did not have to think about it. It is 450 pages long, and I DNF'd it at page 35. I'm not giving up on it. I'm not getting rid of it, it's going on my shelves, and I might return to it at some point, but I couldn't get into this at all. In fact, I fell asleep. At like page 30, I started nodding off on my sofa reading this, and I was really sad about that. I loved Sister Song. It's a book that not enough people talk about, especially when it comes to fantasy. It seems to get overlooked a little bit, and I thought it was so wonderful. I mean, it did well. It did really, really well in terms of sales and everything, but I still don't hear it talked about enough. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'm gonna read this and I'll do a video about both of them and how great Lucy Holland is. And that might still happen one day if I can find a way to actually get into this thing, but for now, I DNF'd it at page 35, and I am not happy about that. I'm not going to say anything bad about it because I have hope I will get into it at some point in the future. The very first book I read this month was Pet Sematary by Stephen King, a book that many people call his scariest novel, and I've only read like 5 Stephen King novels, and I would agree this is the scariest one that I've read. But not just because it's terrifying, but because it's really bleak. It is dark, it is sad, it is oppressive. There is no joy, no humour, nothing happy. This is just an all-out sad, dark, scary, oppressive, bleak thing. Go watch my video if you want to know my full thoughts, especially if you're a Stephen King fan. I really thought this was a wonderful, wonderful novel. I'm a big fan of the original movie. I don't think I've seen the remake, and if I have, I don't remember it at all. But the first movie, that was really, really great. I talk about that a little bit in the video. And I do like Stephen King quite a lot, so I'm glad I read this. But it is really, really bleak. I'm trying to reread a lot of old favourites right now, and I always turn to my patrons to vote on what I should reread next. And for this month, they picked this. The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I am so happy that they did. You can also vote on what I read next if you join my Patreon. I would really, really appreciate it. My Patreon community is amazing. I love them. I spend a lot of time in the Discord hanging out. It's a great place. It's a great time. If you're a bookworm and you love what I do, consider supporting me. Anywho, I did a video on this, but this was my 3rd time reading The Remains of the Day. I've now read it 3 times. That's once every like 3 or 4 years. I first read it like 8 years ago. And Ishiguro is my favourite author, and I do think this is his best work, so it's always great revisiting this novel. If you want to know more, check out the video. I have nothing to say about this really. This is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I was really excited about it. She's kind of a paint-by-numbers fantasy author. Her books are always just good, but I do think they've gotten better and better as they've gone along. Each one I have liked more than the last one, so I was excited for this. It's real mid. It's not bad. There's nothing bad about it, but there's nothing particularly interesting or great about it either. It is mid. It exists. I no longer remember anything that happened in it, and that's disappointing. This book just exists. It's fine. And finally, the graphic novel that I read this month was A Guest in the House by Emily Carroll. I am a colossal fan of her collection of 5 stories, Through the Woods. Through the Woods is a little graphic collection that I read a few years ago. Oh my god, I have such a vivid memory of reading that. Hang on, let me get it. I was in Shakespeare country, Christmas 2014. Oh my god, that's 10 years ago, nearly. Anyway, it was Christmas and my friend Jess and I decided to pop to Stratford. We were actually getting ready to move to China. We just secured jobs in Shanghai and we decided to do a little road trip and visit a few places before we go. We went to Stratford and I picked this up in the local Waterstones. I read it that Christmas and I had such a wonderful time. I remember this so vividly, and I ended up taking this with me to China. I put it in my suitcase, and the whole time I was there, it sat on my shelf in my flat in Shanghai, and I didn't reread it. I've never actually reread it. Kind of weird, I just carry it around with me everywhere. I love this book so much. And so, very appropriately, for my birthday this year, nearly 10 years later, Jess got me this. A Guest in the House, a graphic novel. And it's pretty good. A little bit slow, a little bit weird, a little bit like the plot runs away from itself. But I still enjoyed it. It's about a woman in her 20s who marries a slightly older man who's got a teenage daughter, and she's trying her best to be a good wife to him and a good stepmother to his daughter, but there is a ghost in this house. The house is at the edge of a lake. The daughter says that she sees the ghost of her mother rise out of the lake sometimes, and eventually our protagonist also meets that ghost in the house. But there is so much more to uncover about the husband, about the mother, about everything that happened to them. It doesn't go where you expect at all. There are like 3 twists in the ending that really knocked me off balance. And that's what I mean when I say that the plot gets away from itself. It goes in places I really didn't expect, but I enjoyed the ride. I also really enjoyed the sapphic vibes. Our protagonist, the stepmother, and the ghost of the original mother, they've got a nice thing going on. Alright, there you have it. That is everything that I read this month. 13 and a bit books. The bit was kind of pathetic, but I'm not giving up hope. June is looking to be a really amazing month, by the way. Look forward to my next video. There are some great books on that list. I'm gonna have an amazing June. You'll see. Stick around for that. Send me your book if you want me to edit it. Support me on Patreon if you'd like to, and subscribe for books.